Hi, this is my historical speech. I did my historical speech on my grandmother. She lived through the Great Depression, and I thought it would be a really great thing to talk about. My grandmother grew up in rural Bahama, which is in between Roxborough and Durham, if no one knows where that is. She grew up in a really small town where you hardly saw cars. Everybody farmed for their own food. They raised their own sheep, goats, cattle, and everything like that. So I did my historical speech on the Great Depression and how it affected her family and her life. Growing up, farming and everything like that, they basically grew vegetables and, milk cows and things like that, churned butter, and they chop wood and stuff like that. So they would have, passerbyers, almost like a farmer's market type thing, that would come and they would pick up the groceries, I guess you would call them back then. They'd pick up the vegetables that they had that week. They'd get butter. They would, every now and then they'd slaughter a cow and they'd sell the meat off of the cow and things like that. They'd cure ham in a barn back behind her house. They made a decent, somewhat living from this, and once or twice a year they would go into town and they'd buy fabric or things like that to make their own clothes, stuff to make soap, pantyhose, things like that. But she told me some pretty crazy things about the Great Depression. When the Great Depression hit, the people quit coming, and so they quit getting money in. So all those trips to the store once and twice a year completely stopped, and the money quit coming in. So all those big fields of vegetables and all of their animals, they quit getting fed, and a lot of their animals died from this. And what used to be fields upon fields upon fields of vegetables was now just a small garden in the backyard to just feed the personal family. She said that they hardly ate meat because they didn't want to kill any more of their animals that they had to. They kept one donkey, they had a pet dog, and one cow, and that was it. And, they kept chickens around so they could at least, have meat twice a year, maybe at Thanksgiving and Christmas. But during this time, it was really bad. It not only affected the farmers that lived in rural areas, it affected everyone. It affected the world. When the United States is in a crisis, the entire world is in a crisis. And so from this, people lost their homes. You hear of the Great Dust Bowl, where people were traveling out west and things like that. It was just a really bad time for this country. So just a small little girl who grew up in rural Bahama, for her to be affected like this, think about how everybody else was affected. She went on to grow up and teach me these lessons and teach me that, be grateful for that you have. You went days upon weeks without meat.
They would just eat cabbage and vegetables and things like that. So, be grateful for what we have. Grateful that you know when your next meal is coming. That you live in a home that has running water. You don't have to use an outhouse. Just be grateful for everything that you have. She wants to marry and have 6 children. I'm grateful that I have a grandmother who lived through a time like this, where she can teach me these lessons and she can tell me all the things I need to know. So I feel that I took from my grandmother life lessons that will forever live with me, to be grateful for what I have, to respect my elders, and to learn from their wisdom. I am my grandmother, C. John Ellis, and I also got some information off PS.gov, and I wrote American by Murray Newton Rothbard. And so from those 3 resources, I really saw images and testimonies from people who lived through this time. And we're going through a time now, but it can be worse. It's a lot.